Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you've ever felt completely intimidated by those massive, complex stories in the Old Testament, you're in the exact right place. Today, we're doing something really exciting. We are jumping into a literal masterclass on how to interpret and teach biblical stories. We'll be drawing directly from Dr. Stephen Mathewson's deep dive into the exegetical process, and the goal is to get you decoding these ancient narratives with total clarity and confidence.
All right, let's map this out. We've got 6 straightforward steps to build out your narrative toolkit today. The exegetical mountain climb, finding the big idea, the ACTS framework, analyzing the action, comedy versus tragedy, and finally, narrative literary devices. Let's get moving.
Step 1. The exegetical mountain climb. This is honestly the perfect overarching metaphor for the work we're about to do. Dr. Mathewson has this brilliant analogy. He says prepping an Old Testament narrative is a lot like climbing Long's Peak in Colorado, all 14,000 plus feet of it. You basically have 2 parts to this journey. First up, you've got the ascent. This is that grueling sweat equity part where you climb up into the text to figure out the author's intended meaning. What's the ethical thrust? Then, you've got the descent, where you safely bring that truth back down the mountain to deliver it to the people in a sermon. Now, for our explainer today, we are hyper-focused on the ascent. We're building the skills to get you to that summit of understanding.
Okay, moving right along to step 2, finding the big idea.
So here's the challenge, right? We live in an age that absolutely loves bullet points. But Old Testament narratives? They do not use bullet points. You can't just scan a story about Isaac and Rebekah looking for 4 easy steps to a better marriage. Instead, these historical narratives drop their profound theological payloads subtly. Think about stories like Cinderella or Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer. A kid doesn't finish watching Rudolph and say, "Ah yes, given the opportunity, one can successfully turn a social liability into a vocational asset." I mean, no kid says that, but that is exactly the central idea they just absorbed. And that's what we have to do. We have to hunt for that central unifying big idea the biblical author was trying to get across.
But to actually find that big idea, you've got to select an entire, complete biblical unit of thought. If you're used to the New Testament epistles, where you can easily just grab a single paragraph and run with it, this is going to be a massive adjustment. If you only read Genesis 38, verses 1 through 11, you just have the setup. The tension hasn't resolved yet. You have to take the whole story. Like, you really can't separate 2 Samuel 11 from 2 Samuel 12 and expect to get the full narrative of David and Bathsheba. You've got to let the story's own plot dictate your boundaries.
Which leads us perfectly to step 3, the ACTS framework. To really master the basics of unpacking these ancient texts, we're going to use a super simple acronym, ACTs. A stands for action, which is the plot. C is for characters. T is for talking, because dialogue carries a massive amount of meaning here. And S is for setting, meaning both literary and historical context. Now, for our purposes today, we are going to drill down exclusively into that first letter, A, for action.
There's a great story from Dr. Mathewson about watching the legendary baseball player Albert Pujols warming up. Now, instead of facing live 95-mile-an-hour pitches, Pujols was just hitting a ball off a simple batting tee. He was slowing down his stroke, practicing the roll of his hands, isolating his hips. Why? Because when he actually steps up to the plate during the game, he needs all those mechanics to be completely intuitive. That is exactly what we're doing with the ACTS framework. We are essentially hitting off a batting tee. We're practicing the mechanics of action, characters, talking and setting one at a time so that when you're staring down the fastball of a complex biblical narrative, your analysis just kicks in like second nature.
All right, stepping up to the T for step 4, analyzing the action.
So the crucial thing to know here is that plots in Old Testament narratives almost always follow a universal 4-stage flow. Step 1 is the exposition. That's your setup, the background info, getting the characters and the situation into place. Step 2 is the crisis. This is the conflict, the tension, maybe a whole series of defining problems. Step 3 is the resolution, where the plot starts descending from its climax toward a solution. And step 4 is the conclusion, or the denouement, where all those loose ends get tied up and we finally see the aftermath.
Now, a quick tip. As you read, please don't agonize over the exact verse where the exposition ends and the crisis begins. It's not a manual transmission where you feel this clunky, deliberate shift from first into second gear. It's way more like an automatic transmission. The movement between these stages is fluid, and sometimes you barely even notice the shift. Just look for the broader movements of the story.
Let's put this into practice with a concrete example. Take the incredibly messy, complex story of Judah and Tamar in Genesis 38. The exposition sets up Judah marrying a Canaanite woman and having sons. Then, boom, we hit a series of escalating crises. The sons keep dying, Tamar is denied her rightful inheritance, and she gets so desperate she actually deceives her father-in-law, Judah, and gets pregnant. The ultimate climax hits when Judah furiously orders Tamar to be burned. Talk about tension. But the resolution is swift and honestly stunning. Tamar just pulls out Judah's own seal and staff, basically whipping out his ancient driver's license and credit card, to prove he's the father. The tension vanishes instantly as Judah declares her more righteous than himself. Tracking those shifts in action, that is exactly how you uncover the beating heart of the story.
And that brings us to step 5, comedy versus tragedy. Now, you might be wondering what we mean by comedy here. When literary scholars call a biblical story a comedy, they do not mean it's laugh-out-loud funny or filled with jokes. A comedy simply refers to a U-shaped plot. It starts off in prosperity, dips way down into a deep crisis or tragedy, but then pulls up sharply into a happy, prosperous resolution. A tragedy, on the other hand, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a narrative that ends in sadness or total disaster. To put that into perspective, think about the Book of Esther, or Ruth, or the story of David and Goliath. Those are your classic comedies. The David and Goliath story isn't humorous, right? But it starts okay, descends into the terrifying crisis of this massive giant, and then ascends to a soaring, triumphant resolution. On the flip side, you have stories like Samson, King Saul, honestly almost the entire book of Judges. Those serve as profound, devastating tragedies. Pinpointing whether the author is writing a comedy or a tragedy gives you a massive shortcut to grasping the intended ethical thrust. Which brings us to our final stop today. Step 6. Narrative literary devices. These are those nuanced little tools writers use to add specific color, pacing, and punch to the plot. First up, keep your eyes peeled for archetypes. You'll frequently run into hero stories, journey stories full of growth and danger, temptation stories, or rescue stories. You'll also see what we call type scenes. These are recurring structural patterns, like a major event happening at a well, or the classic unexpected twist of the younger brother being chosen over the older one. When you can spot these familiar patterns, you can instantly see where an author might deliberately break the mold to make a specific theological point. Next is repetition. Now think back to high school English class. Repetition was basically a cardinal sin, right? Dr. Mathewson jokes about his teacher scrolling repetitive and redundant in bright red ink all over his papers. You were supposed to say it once and say it well. But in Old Testament narratives, repetition is a virtue. Because they didn't have bold fonts or italics back then, writers repeated key words or phrases to physically force the reader to pay attention. When David is crying out, "My son, my son, my son," over Absalom, that repetition is the author literally grabbing you by the collar to emphasize the devastating depth of that tragedy.
We've also got to talk about time and pacing. You have to distinguish between narrated time and narration time. Narrated time is the actual historical time passing in the story. Days, months, years. Narration time is the amount of textual space the author uses to tell it. This is a huge clue for emphasis. If an author blasts through 20 years of history in just 11 verses, but then pumps the brakes and spends an entire chapter describing a conversation that took 20 minutes, well, you know exactly where the author wants your focus. That slowdown points you right to the core of the message.
Finally, be on the lookout for irony. You've got verbal irony, which is just a character saying the exact opposite of what they mean, like Mitchell sarcastically telling David how much he quote-unquote honored himself dancing before the ark. But then you have dramatic irony, which is way more intense. This is when a character speaks, totally oblivious to the terrifying weight of their own words, but the reader knows. Think of Judges chapter 4. The enemy general tells Jael to stand at the tent door, and if anyone asks if a man is inside, she should say no. He thinks he's locking down his safety, but we, the readers, know Jael is standing there secretly gripping a tent peg. That answer, no, is going to be way truer than he ever realizes. Okay, we have covered a ton of technical ground today, from plot stages all the way to irony. But before we wrap up this portion of the Acts framework, there's a vital reminder we just can't ignore. Dr. Mathewson quotes William Lane, a New Testament commentator, who said, "I've often adopted the Puritan practice of taking this material before the Lord on my knees." Look, as deeply satisfying as this literary analysis is, careful study is never a substitute for prayer. We absolutely must saturate our exegetical work with a plea for the Spirit's help to truly understand how God wants us to respond to these ancient narratives. So, as we bring this explainer to a close, I want to leave you with this. Are you ready to step up to the batting tee? By deliberately practicing how to spot the exposition, the crises, the pacing, and the irony, you're building up serious muscle memory. Pretty soon, dissecting the action of an Old Testament plot won't feel clunky or mechanical at all. It's going to become incredibly intuitive, opening up the profound, life-changing truths these stories were always meant to deliver. So get out there, keep practicing, and we will see you next time as we continue unpacking the ACTS framework.